coming back. That's great. So we are going to continue our deal in James. What's our deal? Study. This will be fun. Okay. We're continuing our study in James, and we're continuing on where we left off in chapter 5, verse 12. Now, if you remember, and I hope you will because it's only been a week, we are basically at the point where James is summing everything up, and he's putting in reminders and encouragements to people as to what their everyday life should look like. So, what did we talk about last week? There we go. Patience, long-suffering. So we are to live our lives patiently, right? Patient, but eagerly awaiting. And one of the things that I asked you to kind of mull over is, what exactly does that look like? Has anybody figured out what they think that looks like yet? I won't ask you to say it out loud. I was just wondering. All right. Well, apparently we need to continue to think about that. If you think that you figured it out, feel free to let me know what you think you figured out. That'd be great. Today we're going to continue on, and we're only going to go over one verse, but there's a lot in this verse, and it affects our everyday lives in an unbelievable way, even though we may not even realize that it does. Now, some people kind of lump this section together with the verses that we went over last week. So last week we went over 7 through 11. And this is kind of tagged on at the end, kind of like, it's just one verse, it's not that big a deal. We have chosen to separate it out and to really explore it because there is a definite change here, and we know that because it starts out with the word but. Just one T, which indicates to us that there is something important that needs to be said that's not the same as what was being said before, but we need to continue on. So let's go ahead and just read. Everybody geared up. It's a long one verse. But most of all, my brothers and sisters, never take an oath by heaven or earth or anything else. Just simply say yes or no so that you will not sin and be condemned. Thank you for bearing with me as we read through that. So oaths, swearing. We experience this on a regular basis. If you are a juror, you are supposed to take an oath. For my job at the IRS, I had to take an oath. Doctors have to take oaths. If you give testimony in a court trial, you're supposed to take an oath. If you become a public officer in any way, shape, or form, you have to take an oath. In fact, the newest thing is instead of taking an oath on like a Bible or the Constitution, it's to take an oath on a Kindle or an iPad. This has happened. Firefighters in New York forgot to bring a Bible to the swearing-in ceremony for the new firefighters, so they pulled out an iPad, pulled up the Bible. Boom, there you go. In Germany, one of the cabinet members decided point blank, I am not going to swear on the Bible, I want to swear on the Constitution, and I'm purposely going to use my own personal e-reader, my Kindle, to do it. And now that Kindle sits in their museum. So people find various things to swear on a regular basis. There are numerous examples of us finding those types of things, right? Presidents, that's a public office. Most of them swear in on their own Bible or on a family Bible. And usually instead of the closed book, they do a particular page. Isaiah and Psalms are popular choices. Franklin Roosevelt swore in 4 times on 1 Corinthians 13. We have America's first Muslim congressman was elected in 2006. When asked if he would use the Quran to swear in, he said he didn't know. And of course, conservatives got up in arms about it. And he ended up, just to prove a point, swore in on the Quran, but it was the Quran English translation that was owned by Thomas Jefferson. So there are opportunities and there are times where we take solemn oaths. If you also look through the Bible, you'll find many times in Numbers and Deuteronomy particularly where there are oaths that are to be taken. Oaths to be taken in God's name, even. There are oaths that God himself takes before man. So how is it that we can sit here and James can tell us, don't take an oath? Yet we have examples of God taking an oath. How do we balance that out? How do we balance out the fact that God himself, who brought the law to the Israelites, required them to take oaths by him? And then we have James saying, don't do it. Well, fortunately for us, it's not difficult to understand that God knows things that we don't, right? So let's take a look real quick. The word oath in Hebrew is the word shabua, which means to swear. The Greeks use the word horkos, which means to bind or to strengthen. So in other words, you are strengthening your word by swearing to some higher authority. So an oath or swearing usually has three parts, because it's a testing of truth, calling for God to witness, or invoking God's punishment if you violate your word. Does that make sense? How many times have you sworn and not even realized that you've done it? Have you heard of by Jove? That is an oath. Jove is a Greek god. People either swore by Jove or by Zeus. So all those British movies, you walk around, oh, by Jove, I think he's got it. That's swearing an oath. Or something happens and you go, oh my God. You have sworn an oath. You didn't even realize it. These things become so entwined in our everyday life that it's not something that we even realize. And that was the case in the time that James wrote, hey, don't take oaths. Because it was so ingrained in the Jewish culture to take oaths. I mean, they're directed to, right? In Deuteronomy and Numbers it says, hey, swear by the God, your Lord Almighty. So there are times when it's appropriate to take an oath, but it's oaths that are directed by what? That are protected by God. God himself took an oath. Why did he take an oath? Because he knew that we're liars, and we needed to feel extra security that he would back up his word. Because in reality, that's all oaths really are. We don't feel secure in someone just saying, yeah, yes, 100%, I agree. I will do that. That's not enough in our world. If it was, you'd have politicians being asked a simple question. Are you going to do what the people that put you in the office asked you to do? Yes. Great. In some ways, I think that would be a lot simpler and a lot better because you'd be able to see the deception right then and there. But is it wrong for me to have said, yeah, I'll do what you said that I'm supposed to do because I work for the IRS? Is it wrong for you to take an oath as you give witness to show that you're telling the truth in a trial? Is it wrong for you to take an oath as a juror, or if you become a doctor or a police officer? Is it wrong to take those oaths? What do you guys think? Right? It's not wrong to take those oaths. It's wrong to take those things in vain. It's wrong to present yourself in such a way that such oaths really are even necessary, and they're really only necessary in this day and age because we are a society of men, and the society of men is built upon lies. Those oaths are necessary to show that, yes, we will do what we're going to do. And they serve as a way that they can be held accountable for their actions. So, just as God took an oath, swearing by what? Himself, because there was nothing higher. It is not inappropriate for us to take an oath. But you see, people like to skirt the issue. And this is what James is addressing here. So, in Jewish culture, if you swore by God, you'd better do it. In fact, that's, the rabbis were really keen on that. Turn with me to Matthew 5. Matthew 5, verse 33. So Matthew 5:33, it says, "You have also heard our ancestors are told, you must not break your vows. You must carry out the vows that you make to the Lord." Now, on first glance, it's just like, okay, so they're just, solidifying it. First of all, when it says, you have heard the law says, it's not literal, you have heard that our ancestors were told. It's not talking about the law. It's talking about rabbinical teaching. So the rabbis have said, you must not break your vows. But the fact that it stops there and then continues with, you must carry out the vows that you make to the Lord. You see, there's a distinction that can be made there. You must not break your vows, but you must carry out the vows that you make to the Lord. So in order to skirt around the issues, because remember, society is built upon man's lies. It was commonplace for the Jews to swear by the temple, to swear by the ark, to swear by the laws. Things that are associated with God, so it gives the impression that I am vowing by God that this will take place. But you see, it gives them that out. It's okay if I don't follow through with my word because I didn't actually swear by God. These are the types of conniving, fudging, one way or the other, that takes place in men's minds when they practice to deceive. Finding that one little loophole so that you're off the hook. Because I didn't actually swear by God, just stuff kind of associated with it, so it's okay. If I fail to live up to my word, it's okay. Jesus further goes on in Matthew to say specifically, hey, listen, if you're swearing by anything on this earth, basically, you're swearing by God. James continues with that teaching and says, hey, stop it. Let your yes be yes. Let your no be no. See, it's one of the things that was ingrained in Jewish society to make these vows on a regular basis without even thinking about it. It was this day and age's, oh my God, or by Jove, if you're British. Or, how many people just stop short? I swear. These things creep into our language on a regular basis. And the only reason that they seem so commonplace for us, the only reason that they're there and we don't even think about it, is because We're inundated with this type of thing all the time. It's akin to using as a filler, right? It's unconscious. You don't think about it, and just one of those, things that comes naturally? Or like, right? Like, it's one of those unconscious things that comes about us, so we don't even think about the power of those words that we speak. When we swear or take that oath and we toss it around so lightly, that has a negative effect. It eats away at the promise of what is true. We are supposed to be reflections of God who only swore an oath by himself because there was nothing greater. We know for certain that what God says is true will be true because he has shown us time and time again. When he says, hey, I'm going to do this, it gets done. He's a man of his word. Do we really need God at this point in time to say, I swear by myself, I'm going to do this? We don't need that. We don't need it because he has shown himself to be true. So why is it we still live in a society that supposedly is majority Christian where we have to continue to take oaths because our yes isn't good enough? Why is that? It's because time and time again, when people speak out, they look for that loophole. How can I tell the truth but not tell the truth at the same time? How can I give myself an out should things go south? How can I manipulate the situation to my favor? Besides, if it's a small lie, it doesn't really hurt anybody, right? The problem is it does. Because we are not islands unto our own. We are connected communities. So James says, hey, listen, as a community, trust in each other. Don't wear it down by saying, I swear by this or I swear by that. Don't take oaths. Just say yes. Because if you can't just say yes, then just say no. There's no problem with saying no. At least it's honest. If you're not going to do something, if you're not going to live up to that word. At least it's honest, and I would say that that's better than lying anytime. In fact, the Firewalkers has a code of conduct. One of those codes of conduct is to be honest when, Jeremiah? At all times. To be honest at all times. Because we're in the process of building up young men with an understanding of yes means yes. Even if it doesn't feel good to say yes sometimes. Even if that honesty, I'm just trying to protect them. Yes means yes. Because every time you hold back that truth from somebody, every time your yes doesn't really mean yes because you've left yourself a little out, you've eroded not only your integrity, but because we're interconnected and we're a group, you've interrupted the integrity of the body as a whole. And that is why in a nation that proclaims itself to be mostly Christian, we still have to take oaths, and it is so ingrained in our society that we can't simply say, yes, I'm going to do it. You hired me to do the job, I'm going to do the job. Because we have failed time and time again to live by that simple motto, to examine ourselves and say, yes should mean yes, because we are reflections of the God whose image we were made in. So James says, hey, my Jewish brothers who are scattered abroad, just say yes, just say no. Break yourself from this habit that you're formed. Separate that part of yourself from society and don't include yourself in it, so that we know that when we ask you a question, when we can count on you to do something, we can count on you to do something. Break yourself from it. And he says, do this or what? What will happen? You will be condemned. And the words that are used for being condemned in this section are only used in a couple places in the New Testament, and they are never, except in James, used in context of believers. It is condemnation. It is judgment. It is being cast out. This is a serious thing because it erodes all the way to the very heart of who our God is. If we can't trust in God, what do we have? And if we are made in His image and we're supposed to reflect Him to everyone around us, and we can't be true to our word, what do we have? You can look all throughout the Old Testament. We've talked about this with firewalkers. If you don't represent God right, you're going away. We have people that didn't burn the incense the right way because they thought that they knew something better, and they were gone. We have Moses, who instead of talking to the rock, struck it. God said, dude, I love you. You're not going into the promised land. He was condemned not to enter the promised land because he didn't represent God correctly, the way that God told him that he needed to be correctly done. Instead of being able to show his glory by speaking to the rock, he struck the rock out of anger. How less is our condemnation if we continue to find little ways, to continue to find little things that we can say that make it seem like we're telling the truth when we know, well, we need a little breathing room on this one. We need to let our yeses be yes, our noes be no. The other alternative is for us to strengthen those vows. How would you feel about saying, binding myself under no less penalty than that of having my throat cut, my tongue torn out of its roots, and buried in rough sand at sea at low water mark, where the tide ebbs and flows twice in 24 hours, should I ever knowingly or willingly violate this solemn oath and obligation as an entered apprentice? That's what you have to do if you want to be a Mason. That's the oath you have to take. It is seen as a high honor. In fact, the Masons are filled with so-called Christians. But they're being asked to have their tongue cut out and their throat slit if they ever fail in their obligation as a Mason. Do we need, as a Christian church, to come up with an oath that makes it seem so terrible that no one will ever want to not do what they're supposed to do? Do we really need to? I could read further. It talks about opening up their chest and literally physically tearing out their hearts. You see, the reason oaths like that exist is because it needs to be made clear. This is a serious thing. Well, I got to tell you something. James said this a lot simpler. Let your yes be yes, your no be no, or you will be condemned. If you have a proper understanding of what it means to be condemned, that is far worse than slitting your own throat and cutting out your tongue and being buried at low tide. Just say yes. Just say no. Be honest at all times. All of these oaths have one thing in common. They all come out of the mouth. They all are performed by the tongue. James has spent the entire book talking about the tongue. We need to learn to control that tongue. We need to learn to not say, I swear. Oh my God. Jesus. We need to be true. So here's my questions for you. What are your go-to words? What are those unconscious words that come out of your mouth when you're surprised, when you're serious? You know, those words that just come out. Because the only way to get those things cut out of your vocabulary is to consciously think about them. So what are your stumbling blocks to that? 2, how do you really feel about taking oaths for certain things, like working for the government, public service? How do you feel about taking an oath for being a doctor or a politician? These are discussions that we need to have as a church. These are things that don't always get dealt with, and they need to be dealt with. And then the third question, what is it that erodes? What is it that erodes your integrity on a daily basis? We all deal with people, right? We all have work, school, stuff that we do. So when we're joining in those activities, is there some small action that erodes the integrity? Because remember, we're not just representing ourselves. We're a community. We're representing this body. We're representing Christians universally. We're representing God. So think about those things. Talk about those things. And then we should have tons and tons of discussion. Right? That's a pretty hefty list. And that's from one verse. So let's get to it and do it. And be back here in about 20 or so.